In this Lords of the Fallen video, I'm going to be showing you my Seismic Sorcerer build. This is a Pyromancer build that's kind of aimed for the middle of the game, and I'll kind of explain why that is in this video. Before we get into the video, however, a big shout out to Hexworks Studios and CI Games for sponsoring this video. If you guys are picking up the game or considering picking up the game, use our link below to support the channel. So if you've been playing Lords of the Fallen or you're just starting playing Lords of the Fallen, you're going to notice pretty quickly that there are not too many Pyromancy or Inferno spells available at the beginning of the game, and compared to Radiant and Umbral spells, which are, immediately available at Skyrest. So you're going to be wondering, like, first of all, where do I get more spells, and how do I put a Pyromancer build together? So part of this build is going to be showing you how to do those things. So obviously, if you're playing a Pyromancer, you're probably going to want to start as the Pyric Cultist class. This is going to give you 18 Inferno to start with, which is fantastic. You're going to need a lot of Inferno for this build. And you're also going to gain a spell, Infernal Orb, that allows you to range down enemies. What I really like about this spell is it has a bit of an arc to it. And if you play like, a Radiant build, or you start as an Orient Preacher and you're using Radiant Flare, you'll notice that it goes in a straight line from where you cast it. Sometimes it'll hit the lip of like enemies that are higher up and not actually damage them, whereas the orb kind of arcs up. So it's always going to hit them over, like, if they're higher up than you. So you have a less difficult time connecting with this spell than you do with Radiant Flare. Now, if you didn't choose this starting class, it's not a big deal because you will need some other attributes for this build. You'll need some endurance, you'll need some vitality. We're using a little bit of agility, that's kind of optional. So it doesn't really matter if you started with another class or not. You will have to improve your Inferno much more quickly if you choose a different class, though. So the first thing you're going to want to do, no matter what Pyromancy build you're playing, is you're going to want to go free the Tortured Prisoner. And she is located out on Pilgrim's Perch. If you go that direction, and you go down, and then you go back across and go up the lift there, and there's an area where you need to find the Skyrest Bridge key. You find that, you open some doors, you go up some stairs, you'll find her locked in a cell there. If you find her, she'll need an item in order to unlock her. And the item you need to find is called Searing Accusation. This is a catalyst for Pyromancy. This is a little bit stronger than the one you begin the game with in terms of scaling, even though its base spell power is a bit lower. So the higher your Inferno goes, the more this will shine over the base one. But you need to find this. There is a puzzle sort of in Umbral not too far from where she is down the stairs. You need to solve that, and then you'll be able to pick this up. You give this to her, you go rest, she's going to be gone. And then you'll find her in front of the Pieta fight. She'll be standing there, and you can buy, catalyst from her if you don't have one, and you can buy some Pyromancies from her. And in terms of weapon you want to use for this build early on, you can use the Mangler's Axes. I like to dual wield with this build, so you can use two of them if you can get 2 drops, or you can find one and then get another drop. I think there's one laying on the map at the beginning of the game. These are not hard to get. They scale decently with Inferno for early game weapons. And this will kind of get you in the habit of the two-handed moveset, or dual wield moveset rather. And later on in the game, we're going to pick up Bloodlust, which is in Fitzroy's Gorge, which is a decent ways into the game. And we're also going to pick up Axe of the Flayed. What I really like about these is they have decent Inferno scaling, and they deal physical and fire damage, but they also have bleed buildup on them. And I like bleed buildup because it rips off a chunk of health on enemies that you're hitting. And not all enemies can bleed, not all enemies can burn, but for some reason I feel like bleeding is more effective in general in the game than burning, just because the damage it does is better than burning. So it'll kind of, lean into the same playstyle that you've probably started with if you're using the Mangler's Axes, but you'll just be more effective with the bleed than you were with the burn. And I'm using the Pyric Cultist armor for this, which is what they start with. You can change this to whatever you want. Arguably, something heavier that's still in the medium roll range would be better, or you could even take off a little bit in light roll if you'd prefer. The armor is not super important for this build. You could use the Infernal Chantress's armor if you still want to kind of like stay in that fire realm. That would work as well, or maybe even use some of the Ruiner armor if you want something heavier. And another good spell that you can pick up a little ways into the game past this part is Adir's Rage. This is going to buff your physical damage, so even though you do some physical and fire damage, it's going to increase your damage when you're fighting. It's just good for like difficult enemies or boss fights to give you a little extra damage. And to get a couple other spells that I like to use for this build, you're going to have to go ways into the game, and you're going to have to get through the Spurned Progeny boss fight. And once you do this, if you go back to the Tortured Prisoner and talk to her, she'll actually sell you back the catalyst that you gave her earlier, so then you can use that and equip it and upgrade it, which is a little bit better than the starting one. If you're upgrading the starting one, you can stay with that. There's not a huge difference between them, so it's not a big deal. But once you do that, you're going to be able to buy Seismic Slam from her, and Seismic Slam is a game changer in this game. It does, from my testing, physical and fire damage, but what it does is it sends out like fire and physical damage in a line that kind of like knocks enemies backwards. Some enemies will knock down. But what's really, really great about this spell is it gives you a really nice AoE option from long range. And also, if it fires into like a wall or something early, like all the next, things that pop out of the ground will pop out in the same place. So if you can get an enemy up against a wall and then use this like a little bit in front of them, all those things will pop up directly under them and you can like stack damage on them, deal tons and tons of damage. So you want to try and get enemies like onto a position where there's like a wall behind them and then use this and you can absolutely decimate them. This is a very mana hungry spell, so you will have to use consumables to replenish your mana as you're playing throughout levels. This shouldn't be a huge deal. These are not hard to come by. They drop places. You can find them. You can buy them from merchants. These are pretty easy to come by, so you can just farm up some currency and then buy them if you need them. And if you are using the Searing Accusation, you will have 4 slots, so you can use something here like Lava Burst or Magma Surge. Lava Burst is kind of like a bigger fireball that has more of an AoE explosion, costs more mana. It's decent in some situations, but I find that Seismic Slam is usually just better. Otherwise, you can use Magma Surge. Magma Surge is kind of hard because the enemy has to kind of stay in it in order for it to deal damage or set them on fire. It's good against like big bosses or like, large enemies that tend to stay in place. And for the necklace, I like Rogar's Delight. This increases your fire damage and fire defense. Most of your spells deal some fire damage or mostly fire damage. Your weapons both deal fire damage. So this is really good to boost your damage. You can buy this from the Tortured Prisoner, again, after defeating the Spurned Progeny. For rings, the first one I like is Puissance Root. This increases the power of your sorceries. This is going to increase, your magic damage, basically, with your spells. You can get this also from the Tortured Prisoner after defeating the Spurned Progeny. And then Ring of Night Fire. This further boosts your fire damage and wither damage. We don't really do wither damage with this build, but more fire damage is good. This helps boost weapon attacks and spells. And you'll find this one in Fitzroy's Gorge. So attribute-wise, around level 55, around level 50 or so, you're going to have most of your points in Inferno to boost the damage of your weapons, to boost your spell damage, to give you more mana. Inferno gives you more mana. I started as the Orient Preacher, so my Radiance is fairly high, but if you just imagine that those points were out of Radiance and in Inferno instead, you really can't have too much Inferno. There is a soft cap about 40 where your mana starts to like not creep up as high. You go from like 7 or 8 mana a level to like 3 or 4 mana level, so you might want to be a little bit cautious after you hit 40 Inferno and start pumping Endurance and Vitality. I have a little bit low on the Vitality side here. If those points were out of Radiance, I would probably take some of them and increase Vitality. You probably want at least 25 Vitality, maybe 30 Vitality. And Endurance you really don't need a ton of. You're not really engaging in melee combat as much as you have to. You're trying to stay at range and use Seismic Slam as you can, range things down, and then just kind of engage one-on-one. You can take on one enemy. The agility there is really just to meet the requirements of Bloodlust, but you may not need that depending on what weapons you're choosing. I do like the dual wield setup here, and unfortunately you only get one of this axe, so that you can't dual wield both axes, or I would do that, or dual wield Bloodlust, so you can do both that. So unless you want to put like the Mangler's Axe in one hand and do that, you're going to need a little bit of agility in order to meet the requirements. So that kind of wraps up my Seismic Sorcerer build. I hope it showed you guys like how you can play like a Pyromancy type build in this game, at least early on in the game. Kind of hard. There are not a lot of early game pyromancies and not a lot of catalysts to choose from early on in the game, and even not a lot of items that boost the damage of this until you get through the Spurned Progeny boss fight, which is a good ways into the game. So for those of you who are wanting to play a Pyromancer, stick it out. Know that that stuff is coming. This is how you get the stuff, and obviously there are more pyromancies past this as well that you can add to this build. Stay tuned for more Lords of the Fallen builds. We will have like I think a Death Knight build coming, or some sort of Umbral build coming, and a ranged build. I'm going to try and make like an archer or something like that. If you have suggestions for builds you want to see, leave them in the comments below.